The Chinese soldier had the American colonel in his sights, at a range he did not often get, with a clear line and a steady rest for his rifle. And he did not pull the trigger, and he spent a great deal of the rest of his life trying to explain to himself exactly why. He was a rifleman, one of the enormous number of Chinese soldiers in the hills around the Chosin Reservoir, and he had found himself, in the confusion of one of those days, in a position on high ground with a view down onto a piece of the American line, and into his sights had come an American he slowly realized was someone important. The way the others moved around him, the way he carried himself, the lack of fear in a man walking upright where other men crouched. This was not an ordinary soldier. This was someone the others looked to, an officer, a senior one, exactly the kind of target that a soldier is trained to take when he gets the chance, because killing the man the others depend on is worth more than killing 10 of the men who depend on him. He had the shot. He was sure afterward that he had the shot. The range was right, the rest was steady, the target was clear and unaware. Everything his training told him to do pointed to one action, which was to fire, and remove from the battlefield a man whose death would hurt the Americans more than almost any other single death he could cause. And he watched the American through his sights, and his finger was on the trigger, and he did not fire. And what he saw in those seconds, the thing that stayed his hand, is the reason this is a story worth telling. Because it is not the story you might expect, and it says something about war and about men that the simple version leaves out. If you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Let me back up. Because to understand why the soldier hesitated, you have to understand what he was actually looking at, and to understand that, you have to understand the situation on both sides of that frozen hill. In late November and early December of 1950, the 1st Marine Division was surrounded at the Chosin Reservoir in the mountains of northern Korea, fighting its way out down a single road in cold that fell to 35 degrees below zero. And around it, in the hills, was a Chinese army that had been given the task of destroying it, an army that was itself suffering terribly, in the same cold, often worse, because it was even more poorly equipped for that winter than the Americans were. That is a thing worth pausing on, because it changes how you see the man with the rifle. The Chinese soldiers at Chosin were not a faceless horde, whatever the accounts written in fear made them out to be. They were men, mostly young, many of them conscripts, freezing and starving in those same mountains, dying of the same cold that was killing the Americans, sent by their own command into attacks that cost them staggeringly, with far less food and far less protection from the cold than even the surrounded Marines had. The soldier in our story was suffering. He was hungry in a way the Americans, for all their hardship, mostly were not. He had watched his own friends freeze. He was as much a victim of that terrible winter as anyone on the other side. And that matters, because it means that when he looked through his sights at the American colonel, he was not a monster looking at a hero. He was an exhausted, freezing, frightened young man, looking at another human being across a few hundred yards of snow, and the thing that happened in his mind in those seconds was a human thing, not a military one. Now, here's the thing about what he saw. He had expected, when he focused on the important American, to see the enemy. The thing you are supposed to see through a rifle sight, the target, the abstraction that training works so hard to create, because it is very difficult to kill a person and much easier to kill a target, and armies survive by teaching their men to see targets where there are people. But something about the clarity of the sight, the stillness of the moment, the fact that he had time, undid the abstraction. He watched the American colonel long enough that the man stopped being a target and became a person, and what he saw the person doing was the thing that stayed his hand. Here's what doesn't make it into the simple version. In the accounts as they have come down, what the soldier saw the colonel doing was not commanding, not directing fire, not any of the things that would have kept him safely in the category of enemy officer. He saw him caring for his men. The specific details vary in the telling, but the shape is consistent. The colonel was moving among his soldiers in a way that was unmistakably about them and not about himself, tending to them, checking on them, doing the things a man does when the people around him are his responsibility and he feels the weight of it. He saw, through the sight, not an enemy commander, but a man looking after other men, in the cold, with a care that was visible even at that distance, even through a rifle scope, even to an enemy. And the soldier, who was himself freezing and frightened, and far from anyone who was looking after him, recognized what he was seeing. He recognized it because it was the thing he most wished someone were doing for him. Here was a man, on the other side, doing for his soldiers the exact thing that no one was doing for the soldier behind the rifle, and in the instant of recognizing it, the American stopped being the enemy and became something harder to shoot, a good man, doing a good thing, of a kind the watcher longed for himself. Stay with me, because what happened in the soldier's mind is the whole story, and it is more complicated and more honest than a simple tale of mercy. It would be easy to say the soldier spared the colonel out of pure compassion, that he saw a good man and could not bring himself to kill him, and that this was a beautiful moment of humanity transcending war. And there is truth in that. But the soldier himself, in the versions where he tried to explain it, was never quite satisfied with that account, because he knew it was not the whole of it, and the rest of it is what makes the story real rather than sentimental. Part of what stayed his hand, he came to understand, was not only mercy, but a kind of recognition that cut both ways. He was a soldier whose own officers, in his experience, did not move among their men like that, did not visibly carry their men's suffering as their own. And seeing an enemy officer who did produced in him not only compassion but something more disorienting, a glimpse of what leadership could be, and therefore a glimpse of what he himself had been denied, and killing the man who embodied it would have been, in some way he could not have articulated at the time, killing the proof that it existed at all. He did not want that proof to stop existing. Some part of him needed the man who cared for his soldiers to keep being alive in the world, even on the other side, even as his enemy, because that man was evidence of a thing worth believing in. And this is where it gets complicated, because a soldier who does not fire on a legitimate target has, by the hard logic of war, failed in his duty. His own army would not have thanked him. The colonel he spared would go on to help lead the American breakout that cost the Chinese dearly. In pure military terms, the soldier's hesitation was a mistake, possibly a costly one, and a harder man would have taken the shot and been right too, by the only standard that war officially recognizes. But the soldier was not sorry. That is the part that lasted. In all the years afterward, freezing memory though it was, he was not sorry he had not fired, because he had been given, in that moment, a choice between two things: to be a good soldier and to remain, himself, a certain kind of human being. And he had chosen to remain a human being at the cost of being a good soldier, and he found that he could live with that trade far more easily than he could have lived with the other one. He had kept something by not firing, not the colonel's life only, his own something, the part of himself that could still recognize a good man and refuse to destroy him, even when destroying him was his job. See, what most people miss about this story is that they think it is about the colonel, about how even his enemies could see his greatness. It is at least as much about the man behind the rifle, because the real drama was not on the American side of the scope. The colonel never even knew it happened. The real drama was entirely inside the freezing young man with his finger on the trigger, who was given, in a few seconds, the oldest and hardest choice there is: whether to do the terrible thing that his situation authorized and even demanded, or to refuse it and keep intact the part of himself that would have been damaged by doing it. That choice is not really about the target. It is about who the person holding the rifle decides to be. And the soldier decided in those seconds that there were some things he would not do even when he was allowed to, even when he was supposed to, and that decision was about his own soul and not about the colonel's worth. And there is a reason this reaches into lives that will never hold a rifle, because everyone, sooner or later, is given a moment where they have someone in their sights, not literally, but in the sense that matters. A moment where they have the power to do real harm to someone, where the harm is authorized, where no one would blame them, where the logic of the situation says take the shot, the cruel word you have every right to say, the advantage you could press, the person you could destroy, and be justified in destroying. And in that moment, the real question is never really about the other person and whether they deserve it. It is about you and who you will be afterward, and whether the thing you keep by not firing is worth more than the thing you would gain by firing. The soldier at Chosin answered that question with his finger on the trigger, and the answer was that some things are not worth what they cost your own soul, even when you are completely entitled to take them. The soldier lowered the rifle. The colonel moved on, never knowing, and went on to help lead his division out of the trap. And the soldier went back down the reverse slope of that hill into his own war, carrying with him a thing he would turn over for the rest of his life, not as a regret, but as one of the few moments in that whole terrible winter when he had been given a choice about what kind of man to be, and had chosen well. He did not tell the story for a long time, because it was not a story that reflected well on him as a soldier, and because the other side would never know and his own side would not understand. But he told it eventually, as an old man, the way men finally tell the things that mattered most. The day he had a good man in his sights, and understood that he was good, and did not fire, and kept something of himself that he would have lost forever if he had. So, was he right not to fire, to spare a legitimate enemy target, at real cost to his own side, because of what he saw through the sight? Some would say no, that a soldier's duty is not sentimental, that in war the officer who cares for his men is exactly the most valuable man to kill precisely because his care makes his men fight harder, that the soldier's hesitation was a failure that likely cost his own comrades dearly, and that mercy toward one man on the other side is paid for in the blood of men on your own. Others would say that the soldier understood something the hard logic of war leaves out, that a man is more than his usefulness on a battlefield, that there are things a person can lose in the act of killing that are worth more than any tactical advantage, and that in choosing to remain the kind of man who would not destroy a good man in cold blood, the soldier won the only victory that was still available to him in that frozen, pointless place, the victory over what the war was trying to turn him into. Let us know where you land in the comments below, and if you want more untold stories from the men who actually fought these wars, make sure you subscribe.